So, I suppose I'll begin. How did you enter the service?
I was drafted
Okay.
November of 1942.
Okay, you beat me to it. How old are you then?
21 years old.
Okay. What was life like before the war for you, personally?
Well, before the war, I was driving a taxi cab in Boston 6 days a week, and I went to school, aircraft school, New England Aircraft, which, believe it or not, at that time was in Kenmore Square, and then they moved to the airport, which at that time was called East Boston Airport instead of Logan.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, to show you how life was then, trains were the big things then.
Yeah.
And at the airport in East Boston, when a plane would come in at 9 o'clock, we'd go up to watch it land. That's how fast it's going now. And I was going to aircraft school nights. It was 3 nights a week, all through the summer and winter, no breaks.
Okay.
And you had to complete 2 years, and then another 3 months, and then you take your exam as a mechanic.
Okay.
Then there was another 2 years you went for engine. I did airplane, that is frames and fabric and so forth.
So the body of the airplane.
What's that?
You'd be the mechanic of the body of the airplane?
Right.
Okay.
Well, anyhow, what happened, most of the fellows that were in there automatically figured when they get drafted, they would go into the Air Force as ground crew. As luck would have it, when I was drafted and I went to Fort Devens and they classify you, they asked me what I did, and I just put down taxi driver, aircraft student. Well, whoever did the classification saw taxi driver. Automatically, I was then sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, to join the 10th Armored Division as a tanker.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the Army does things, you know, tank, driving, so forth, vehicles. Well, anyhow, I was at Fort Benning for I think it was close to a year, and then just before maneuvers, Tennessee maneuvers, which every division had to go through, myself and another fellow from Massachusetts, there were only 2 of us. What's that?
In the whole group?
No, in this company. I was in a maintenance company.
Okay.
As a tank driver. I was driving a light tank, an M5.
Okay.
That was the hot rod of the Armored Forces. It was a useless piece of equipment.
What was the name of the M5?
Well, the British called it the Honey. We called it the Stewart, I think it was.
Oh, I thought the M3 was the Stewart, or am I wrong on that?
No, no.
Okay.
No, the M3 was something else. This M5, it was a very light tank.
Yeah,
It only
Stewart's
had a
light tank.
37 millimeter, which was a pea shooter.
Yeah.
And in combat in Europe, of course, it was absolutely useless, except as a recon vehicle.
Was it
They
at least
used
fast?
Huh?
Was it at least fast for a tank?
Oh, well, it had 2 Cadillac flathead V8s with a hydromatic. You didn't have to shiv it. Oh, it was like a hot rod. The only thing is, you didn't need hot rods. We need armor and armament.
Yep.
This had neither. But it would fly. It would fly. It was a lot of fun to drive. And then I got in a disagreement with the tank commander one day down at Fort Benning. He was a regular Army guy, and I went to the PX and got some chocolate bars, brought them back, while the other 2 guys were washing the tank. In the Army, you always wash the tank when you come back. It was so stupid. It was dirtier after you washed it. All you did is spray a hose on it.
Yeah.
But that was typical Army. Just like every time you fired a gun of any kind, you had to clean the gun for a week afterwards to get used to the gun.
Okay.
Well, anyhow, I disagreed with him. I went to the first sergeant, and he let me drive this truck, a supply truck, in which case I could go down to Columbus 3 days a week to bring laundry and stuff down. Then, after about a year, all of a sudden, the reason you had a tank and a maintenance company, the maintenance company was really 2 companies in one. Half of it were maintenance.
Yep.
They would take care of what they call second echelon maintenance. First echelon is up to the driver. He takes care of the air and the tires, the gasoline, all that stuff. Second echelon is a little more concerned with that. Then there's third echelon and fourth echelon, which gets steeper. Well, the other half of the company, which I was in, were 8 medium tanks and 4 light tanks. And
What were
this,
the medium tanks, Shermans?
Sherman.
Okay.
Now these tanks were like on call. In other words, in combat, if a tank got knocked out or broke down for any reason, you would be sent, your tank would be sent up to replace it, like a designated hitter,
Yeah,
you know?
I see.
And now that went, now in the armored divisions, I have to tell you this, there were the first armored division which spent the whole life in combat in Italy. The second and third and the first were what they call square divisions. They had 2 armored regiments. From the 4th on through the 14th Armored and the 16th and the 20th, they were triangular because they found that these heavy divisions, square divisions with 13,000 men, were too unwieldy in combat.
Okay.
So they took 1 battalion out of each one of them. That comes later. Well, anyhow, so we were going to go on Tennessee maneuvers, and all of a sudden myself and a fellow from Oxford, Mass, were yanked out and told to go to regimental headquarters. We took a whole bunch of tests. Now in the Army, when you go in the Army, and I think they do that even today, you automatically take what they call an Army Ground Force Classification Test, AGFT. Now, if you want to go to OCS and become an officer, you have to attain a 110 or better in that test. Now,
how good is that really? Like,
well, it's not an intelligence test. Everybody calls it. What it is, it's a test devised to see how fast you grasp things.
okay.
Because in those days, everyone was in a hurry to get
New
people
concepts.
oriented, and that's what they needed.
Okay.
So if you want to be an officer, you had to get 110 or better to qualify for OCS.
What was the
Now,
perfect?
What's that?
What's the perfect score on that? You know?
Oh, I don't know what first is.
Okay.
Now, what happened, I found out later, myself and this other fellow had gotten 115 or better.
Okay.
And because we got 115 or better, the Army had at that time specified, started what they call this is very important, ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. They were already in 1943 looking forward to the end of the war, believe it or not, and they wanted doctors, dentists, engineers, language people, and one other thing, and they asked you to take your choice. So I put down languages, I got engineering, naturally. So they took us over to Alabama Polytech and gave us a week's battery of more tests, and after which we knocked out about 10% of them. And then they took us out of the 10th Armor, the 2 of us, and they sent us to the University of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very rapid course, 3 months at a time, 13 weeks. If you flunked one course, you went out back to the troops. You were still in the Army, of course.
Okay.
Now, I went through the whole first 9 months, and at the end of the 9-month period, the Army decided that they needed manpower because they were losing a lot of men in Europe and the Pacific, and they needed replacements.
Yep.
So they cut down the ASTP program except for dentistry and medicine, and they sent everyone back to the troops, to the nearest outfit to the school they were in. If they were at BU, they'd go to an outfit up here. You follow me?
Yeah.
They had taken over, I don't know, maybe 30 colleges all over the country. Now, they offered us dentistry and medicine, medicine. And if we took some exams in Atlanta, they would pay for our whole medical thing. And of course, so it sounded great. I figured, hey, except that after you got out, you had to stay in the service 7 more years. That killed it for about 95%, including me. That was enough. So I ended up back, believe it or not, as liquid to the 10th Armored Division. Only now I came back in a line company as a gunner.
Okay.
And then what happened, my outfit in the meantime was disbanded. Once I was with, they ended up going to Fort Knox as what they call a bastard battalion, a separate tank battalion. They stayed at Fort Knox as a demonstration outfit till about the month before the end of the war. They sent over, and they were one of the last ones over. They were the first ones back to go to Japan. The war ended, so they never saw anything. But that's luck, fate. Everything in the Army is fate, F-A-T-E. You can say all you want about, you know, the luck of the looking for this, looking. You cannot look out for yourself. You can look out for yourself as much as you want, but fate will have its way of getting into you.
Okay.
So anyhow, so then.
Can I stop for a second? I want to clarify one thing. In a tank, there was a
Well,
commander.
I'll get back to that.
Okay.
The first Sherman tanks we had down there had 5 Chrysler 6-cylinder engines, L-head, 2 here, 1 up top with a master crankshaft, 30 cylinders, 30 spark plugs, and remember this was the days before electronic ignition.
Yeah.
And we would go out on a road march with 5 tanks, end up 3 of them be towed back. And I used to joke and say, we're not even in combat and we can't keep the things running. Well, they disappeared. See, Chrysler, I found out later, was making the tank bodies, and as a result they got the contract for the engines, but it was a joke. So the next alternative, they used a Wright Whirlwind, I think it was a 9-cylinder engine, an airplane engine.
Okay.
And that was an improvement over the Shermans. As a matter of fact, some of them in Europe lasted through the end of the war. But it still wasn't perfection. And finally, just before we left for overseas, they came out with a Ford overhead cam, big V8, and that was fabulous. That engine was, as a matter of fact, they even used that in Korea too. It was a good engine. But in the Sherman, you have, down below, you have a driver, and on the right-hand side, an assistant driver, who is also a bottle gunner. He has a .30 caliber in front of him. In the turret, there are 3 men. You got the tank commander, he's usually the guy you see up top.
Yep.
You had a gunner.
You got 50 cal. Oh, you mean the tank gunner or the guy up top with the gun?
The tank commander is the guy up top.
Okay.
He tells the tank of where to go, when to stop,
Okay.
and so forth. Then you have the gunner who does the actual firing. And the loader radio man would be myself at that point.
Okay.
Your job was to get the ammunition out of the floor. You carry about 104 rounds under the floor. And you feed the ammo to the gunner. Or you actually put the ammunition into the cannon, the gun. And the gunner does the firing.
Okay.
And you also monitor the radios. Now most tanks had a transmitter and a receiver. In combat, I had 3 to take care of because we were in captain's tank and we had to be in touch with the battalion as well as the company. So we had 2 receivers and 1 transmitter.
Okay.
And the platoon leaders, the lieutenant and the staff sergeant, would have a receiver and a transmitter, and the other 3 in the platoon, there were 5, would just have a receiver, no transmitter. That was the breakdown.
Okay.
And the tank itself was weighed, as you probably know, the Sherman weighed about 35 ton. And they made, between then, 42, and the time I got hit,
A lot.
modification after modification as they found out the shortcomings of the Sherman in North Africa. Give you one example. There's a cage up top, and it rotates with the gun,
Yep.
where the 3 men sit. Now in North Africa, the early tanks, it was a cage with holes in it, but just holes. Well, they found out sometimes when a tank would get hit in North Africa, if the gun was turned a certain way, you only have about 2 minutes to get out of the tank if it catches fire. And the guys would get trapped in and burned to death. So they later made the cage open so that no matter which way the gun was turned, if it got hit and couldn't turn, you could get out through there and go down. They had an escape hatch under the bow gunner's seat up front. But getting out through there in a hurry was...
Was the escape hatch in the front of the tank? Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
It was in front.
Okay.
But it was... Everything was done hit or miss. Then later on, before we went overseas, the tanks decided they have 104 rounds down under the floor, and you carry a certain amount of armor piercing, AP,
And
a certain amount of
explosive.
HE, high explosive, and a certain amount of white phosphorus, WP.
Okay.
Now, most of this stuff is AP and HE.
Yeah.
Now, what happens, you have to yank them out of there, so they decided in order to avoid potential fire hazard, if the tank got hit, not if, but when it got hit, they had compartments of antifreeze so that it surrounded each 9 rounds of ammunition.
Oh.
Theoretically,
So they won't chain react.
the antifreeze would flood the thing. that was your least you worry, because behind you, you had, I think it was 150 gallons of gasoline. You worried about the ammunition. The radiator in a tank is about, see that thing there?
The window?
That's about, if you brought that down to about here, cut it in half, that's the size of the radiator. And that's
Wow.
behind the turret in front of the engine.
Yeah.
And there's, and this is important later, there are butterfly valves. So when the engine is revved up, they open and give air to the radiator to keep it cool. So anyhow, that was the tank. And of course you had the bogey wheels, and then they changed that suspension later.
Now, when you went back, did you get into an M4 then?
Yeah,
Rather than
right.
an M5? Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, in a tank, it's in a tank battalion, you have a headquarters, a headquarters company.
Yep.
You have A, B, and C. Those are what they call the line company. Those are all mediums. And there are 5, 10, 15, 16 tanks in a company. And one separate tank that has a 105 howitzer instead of a 75 or 76.
What kind of tank would that be?
Sherman.
Oh, with the
These are
105?
Shermans.
Okay.
D company is all light tanks. Now, so this is the technical setup of the tank battalion. And, oh, and then you have a maintenance company, D, that follows you around, taking care of emergency stuff if need
Okay.
be. So that's the way a tank battalion is set up. Now, in each tank company, you have the headquarters platoon, which I was in. You have the captain's tank, and you have a 105 howitzer mounted on its Sherman attached to you. And then they have the 3 platoons, 5 tanks each, with a second or first lieutenant in charge of each
Okay.
of the 5 tanks. And a staff sergeant is the non-com leader of that platoon. So that's the setup of the thing. Then you have 3 battalions make a, excuse me, 3 companies make a tank battalion.
Okay.
A, B, C, and D, and the rest of it. So that's the way a tank battalion is set up. Then you have, now I happen to be, when I got into combat, I was in B company of the 3rd Tank Battalion of the 10th Armored Division.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the 3rd Army, and that's when I went overseas that way. Now, we were the first outfit that went directly from New York to Normandy, but this was 3 months after D-Day.
Okay. So when you got to Normandy, what was your rank?
Let's put it this way. There was something like 10,000 men on the ship. It was the SS Brazil.
Okay.
And I think I was, unluckily or unfortunately, the first guy on the ship to get seasick. And I was seasick
For the whole.
practically the whole trip.
Ah.
We got off in Normandy. I didn't know it was Normandy. We got off on land in the dark. If the whole German army was there, I could have cared less. Have you ever been seasick?
I don't get.
They figured it's cheaper to make more tanks than it is to make heavier ones. Of course, they don't figure in the lives that are lost from the thing. That's not
Always
figured.
money.
War doesn't count that.
No.
Human lives come second. All right. Now the Russians, ironically enough, the best tank in the war was the T-34.
Yep.
That had a tank commander, a gunner, and a driver. Period. 3 men. It was very roughly hewn, but it did the job.
So the gunner had to do the loading as well?
You had
Okay.
gunner had to do everything.
Okay.
And the tank commander did the direction, and the driver, if you got hit, you were out of luck. You didn't have an assistant driver. So, but what happened, it was very maneuverable, and the Germans got the bitterest shock of their lives when these T-34s came on the scene after they had invaded Russia. Because these T-34s were very maneuverable,
Yeah.
very rugged, and they had plenty of them. And their gun was a high velocity, I believe it was a 76 high velocity. And although it wasn't the equivalent of the 88 that the Germans had, it could take on a German
Panzer.
tank.
Tiger.
Incidentally, everyone talks about the German Tiger tank. true, it was really monstrous. It weighs something like 70 or 80 tons. That's double the Sherman.
Yeah.
And it could hold off, even knocked out, it could hold off 10 Shermans. But the idea was that they were very highfalutin, very highly unable to maneuver fast. And the worst thing of all, they were gas eaters like you wouldn't believe. As a matter of fact, after the bulge, they found 18 or 20 of them.
They abandoned them.
Ran out of gas.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the fuel, because they just gulped the stuff. No good.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing. The main tank we always ran into, that I ran, was the Panther. And
Oh,
the Panther, oh yeah, the Panther was a medium tank, and it had a good gun, low silhouette.
More Panthers than Panzer IVs? I know they had that
Well,
many of
the
them.
Panzer, I think the Panther was a Panzer IV, wasn't it?
I think it might have been, they might call it the Panzer V.
Well, maybe it's the Panther V, that's the one. So, so that was the story down in Alsace-Lorraine. And then when, all right, now we're leading up to the bulge. So this took place the 3 weeks of combat we had down in Alsace-Lorraine. There are a lot of stories attached to that, but I don't want to get into all of those. Now, then we lost about, I think we lost maybe another 15 or 20 men and about 5 tanks during the Alsace-Lorraine campaign. So we came back to this town about 5 miles behind the lines. It's got a shower, the only shower we had. And they even had a USO troop came in, we saw that. But we could hear the guns in the distance,
Yeah.
we're not that far back. And of course, one of the big problems you have that I learned, you were always a victim of constipation or diarrhea. Now, you had K rations and Cs, you've heard of them.
Yeah.
The C's are in cans, the K's are in packages.
Yep.
Now, in the packages, some of them had a square of cheese, some of them had a square of a fruit bar. So it was very simple. If you got diarrhea, you ate the cheese bar. If you had constipation, you ate the fruit bar. And it worked, because you were young. But that was par for the course. Now, fortunately, as tankers, we could carry a supply of cans of that. Unlike the poor infantry that had to take a couple of packages of cans with them, we had it on the back of the tank. The only trouble with that, in Normandy, we were told that we were getting bedrolls instead of shelter halves with blankets in them, which we used. They only got 50, and there were 92 men in the company. So they drew lots. Goolkasian drew number 1. I got the first bedroll, of the 50.
Mm-hmm.
I put it on the back of the tank, thinking, when we get someplace where I can open up instead of sleeping in the tank, I'll have the bedroll. In an attack in Alsace-Lorraine, we ran across a whole bunch of Germans. They all came in, Kamerad, and a couple of die had. But in the course of that, we got hit by some mortars. A mortar will shake the tank like crazy, but it won't hurt it. After the battle was over, my bedroll on the back, I opened it up, Swiss cheese. Never got to sleep and threw it out. But that was the thing. And by the way, our battery died during that, after that
That's when
attack.
the battery died?
And little Joe, I had to lay on my belly and crank that. It was nice. It kicked right in. One other thing happened in Alsace-Lorraine before we leave it. We were going to an attack one morning, and we were going out into the field. And it's an open field. You don't know what's in front of you. So we're going in a flank move. And each tank is about 25 or 50 yards apart. And we're moving out. And as we did, the Germans started throwing some artillery in. Now, when a tank is attacked, you back it up, because your heaviest armor is up front. You do not turn it.
Yeah.
So you back the tank up. Matter of fact, the Tiger had 2 reverse feeds, by the way. So you see, they do the same thing. Well, we're backing the tank up, and as the driver backed it up, the turret was on automatic traverse, electric, and the weight of we tipped real bad. We came to an embankment, and he pulled the tank back, the driver. And which was smart, and he kept our whole silhouette below the level of the ground somewhat.
Okay.
And as he did, the gun barrel, because of the weight of it, swung the turret around, and I always had 5 or 6 shells between my legs when we go into an attack, because I couldn't waste time getting them out of the floor.
Okay.
and one of them slipped out and got caught between the strut of the turret as it turned and the other one. So I just picked it and put it back there. Then when we went into an attack, about half an hour later, went back into the attack, I pulled that one out, and I didn't know it was that one was one of them, and I put it in the breech block. It wouldn't go in and it wouldn't come out. See, when you put it in the breech block, the injector fingers come in and push it the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Then the extractors kick it out, the shell out.
Was it warped from the what happened earlier?
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
But then it dawned on me that's what it was. So I took the ball peen hammer, which if you told me to do that today, I took the wooden part of it and hammered on the end of the casing. And Joe Beck, the gunner, was saying, "Jerry, what are you doing?" I says, "Well, it's November, I'm sweating bullets, literally." And I hammered, the sweetest noise in the world. There were two of them. One was the little Joe kicking in when the battery was dead, and this was the other one. When I finally gave it another blow, it click, click, the injectors picked it up and shot it in. It was evidently had just been bent enough so that it wouldn't go in and it wouldn't come out.
Okay.
And we fired it, so it was good.
And then when it fired, it came out?
Oh, the extractors pulled the casing out, the empty shell casing. But that was quite a moment, to say the least.
Yeah.
But, you know, things like that happened all the time, and you had to... Then on another occasion down there, friendly fire again. We had an anti-aircraft detached squad attached to us. And, you know, the tank column could be almost a mile long, you know. The tanks up front, then the armored infantry, so forth back. Well, this anti-aircraft outfit was attached to us, but we didn't have radio contact with them. So in a case like that, what you do is you go back to them and get a runner, one of them, to come back with you, so that if anything happens, he runs back and tells them.
Okay.
So anyhow, it was a dark, rainy night, which most of them were, and I'm sloshing through the mud, and I got back there, and here's this half-track. They're all sound asleep in there. So I'm trying to make a lot of noise. You know, in combat, you have what they call the challenge and the password and reply.
Yeah.
To get challenged. Now that changes every midnight. And the password would be like Boston, the reply would be Red Sox. You follow me?
Yes.
Well, anyhow, I'm trying to get attention so they'll challenge me. I get up right to the half-track, and I'm banging. I have an M3 submachine gun, you know. We call it a grease gun.
Yeah.
I'm banging on the thing, and they wake up. The lieutenant's there. He's in charge. I says, "Who the hell's in charge here?" "Well, what's it?" I says, "You guys are sleeping here?" I said, "I could have dropped a grenade in here and wiped you all out." "Well, the tankers are up front." Well, I said, "Yeah, but we don't know what's going on back here. You better stay awake." The lieutenant was a little miffed, to say the least. They should never have done that. You always post a guard. Well, anyhow, I get a guy, and he's walking behind me back the whole half mile to our tank, the company commander's tank. The guy's walking behind me, not much conversation, we're sloshing the mud. And when I get back there, I decide I'll go up and get a can of rations off the back of the tank. Now it's black and it's raining. I climb up the front of the tank and I go to the back deck to get some cans. And I told Ziggy, the driver, I'm going to get some C's off the back. You want any? On the back of the tank, and all of a sudden I heard click, click. This guy that walked back, "Get off that goddamn tank, you effing German kraut." The guy I walked back got the gun pointed at me, his rifle. I said, "Hey, you just walked back with me." "Cut the shit. Get off that tank." I said, "I just walked back with you." And then slowly he lowered the gun, and I think he was shaken for 15 minutes afterwards. And yours truly was a little upset too. Those are the things that could have happened, you know what I mean? Because especially a guy from the rear, when they get up front, they get very edgy. But this is how friendly fire happens. You know what I mean? I would have enlisted as killed in action, right? That's the way it goes. But there were a couple other episodes like that, but we'll jump off to where we got to Bastogne, because that's what everyone wants to hear. All right. So we got our new tanks to replace the ones that we lost, and then it was a sad moment when we had to go into where the duffel bags were, the guys that were killed, and we had to put them on a truck to send them back. And as I was taking them out, I see the names of the guys in my company. I went over with 92 men and 5 officers. 33 were killed in action of the 92.
And by the end of the war, you mean, or at this time in the war?
Oh, during the campaigns we had.
Okay.
But I can safely say by the time the Bulge, and then they had another episode at what they call some German town that was after the Bulge, and it was a miniature Bastogne, they said. Between that and the other, they lost a third of the men killed. And it's safe to say that if you eliminate the cooks, the 3 or 4 maintenance men, the company clerk, and take 5 or 6 of those out, you got maybe 85 men. Out of these 85, 33 were killed in action. It's safe to say that the bulk of the others all got hit at least once. It had to happen, you know. You can't help it. Anyone who I find out went through from beginning to end, I got news for you. He must have been either a company clerk or something else, because the chances of you going through from one end to the other without getting hit is like trying to go out in the rain and not getting wet, you know. But anyhow, we packed up the tanks. Then at that point, another modification. Joe Beck, who was the gunner in my tank, he wanted he was a corporal. He wanted to get his own. They offered him his own tank, one of the replacements. So Jerry, he says, I want you to be my gunner, he says. I said, why? Well, he says, I've been in the Army all these years, and he says, and you're lucky enough to get this far. He says, I'd just as soon have my own tank. So we walked down the street. This is behind the lines. Here's this Sherman. It looked odd. The glacial plate, the front of it, instead of being the regular slant, was more vertical. It had 75 on it. It had heavier armor. Well, I found out later it was what they call a jumbo. It was 10 tons heavier than the regular Sherman. It was extra armor all around, but the gun was still the 75. I said, Joe, I remember my very words to Joe. I said, Joe, there's only one to company, right? Mm-hmm. You know what tank is going down the road first, don't you? Mm-hmm. You're looking at it.
Yeah.
I do not choose to participate. Sorry, Joe. Well, he says, yeah, but you're a good gunner, and we worked together these 3 weeks. I said, I understand, Joe. I want to continue working, if you don't mind, as much as I can. So poor Joe got that tank, and at that Bastogne, his tank was one of the first ones that could hit. It didn't matter whether it was a jumbo or not. But anyhow, getting back, we got back, and then we were going to go attack Metz. It was still in Patton's Third Army. When the Bulge broke on the 16th, there was the Golden Lions, the 106th, the 28th Division, the Keystone Division. Keystone had been heavily hammered during the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. That was terrible. The 106th were loaded with ex-ASTP guys.
Yep.
All right? Loaded with them. The only division that 2 regiments were captured, the biggest, they were wiped out as a division. And they were overrun first during the Bulge. And the Germans particularly knew that. That's why they attacked there. They knew there were 2 divisions just trying to get a taste of combat. They were useless up there. Well, anyhow, so that was on the 16th. So at that point, Eisenhower, nobody knew what was happening. They had been forewarned and everything, but they didn't listen to anybody. Some women came and told them there's a lot of action going over there. Nobody listened to them. One lieutenant in SHAPE headquarters suspected that, see, they thought that, when we were going up there, by the way, we left Alsace-Lorraine, and we drove up to, went to Arlon, Belgium, and then from there on to Bastogne and then Noville. I thought the war was over because we drove at night with our lights on. We never did that in the States. So I assumed, you know, the war was almost over. Matter of fact, I think Bradley and Eisenhower had made a bet with each other that they'd be over by Christmas. Well, the next thing you know, we headed up to, what's his name? Bastogne. I don't know this. And then along the road, there was an interesting thing happened. We had one of the few sunny days. There was a little Piper Cub. That's a little spotter plane for the artillery. He was flying around up there, and we're getting a play-by-play over our radio, like watching a ball game. And the guy is going like this, he's up, down. see, the thing about the Piper Cub, it was very maneuverable, but of course it was all plywood and wood and paper. So one shot and he's gone. So he's going here, 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 and he's giving coordinates back to the artillery. They keep firing, and the guy is just trying to save his hide up there. So the guy back there yells at him, "Can't you give us better coordinates?" I don't want to repeat what he said.
Yeah.
He says, "If you can do any better, you get up here and try," because evidently they weren't making connection, but it was almost comical. Back in Alsace-Lorraine, one other thing happened. Our captain got hit the first week, the one we left the States with. He had a leg injury, went back, never came back. So this lieutenant came up to our tank, Lieutenant Dodenhoff, I'll never forget it. And he left the Jeep on the road about 35 yards out in the mud, and he walked through, and he told us to announce to us that he's going to be the new company commander. And I says, just then some orders came in. I says, "Lieutenant, you better get in the tank." "No, I'll get back there." So we got in the tank. Next thing, the tank shook like it never had shaken before. Look out, we don't see hide nor hair of Dodenhoff. I mean, literally, we don't see anything but mud. He must have got a direct hit. So we lost him, of course. And then, after the first 3 weeks, the Protestant chaplain came up and asked us, "We understand Lieutenant Dodenhoff was beside your tank when he got killed." So I turned around to Joe and I says, "He wants to write to his wife. Tell him we didn't see it," which in reality we didn't see it. But that's not the point. What are you going to do? Write to his widow that he got blown to bits?
Because he didn't get into the tank?
Right. No.
Oh.
Just the fact that he got blown to bits.
Oh, yeah.
Just say we didn't see it and that was it. But those are the things that happen. But anyhow, on the way up to Arlon in Belgium, we left the 16th from Alsace-Lorraine, and we drove for 2 days to the 18th. And the night of the 18th, we were in Bastogne. And it was cold.
Yeah.
You remember the butterfly valves for the radiator engine? I had British woolen socks, my combat boots on, and my ODs. And every time he would shift gears, it was the coldest winter in 50 years, I found out later. I felt like I was there barefoot. The cold air would come through into the radiator, you know. So finally, we got into what actually happened. I didn't know what was happening then. What actually happened, every division is split into 3 combat commands, CCA, CCB, and CCR. And each combat command has a piece, has 1 tank battalion, 1 infantry battalion, and so forth and so on. Well, we were in the CCB. Now CCA and C stayed down in Luxembourg area, and Luxembourg hardly got touched down in their area. They got a couple of bombs, but nothing serious. B, CCB, which I was in, the lucky guys, we get sent to Bastogne, and in Bastogne, now there were no 101st there at this time, we were split into 3 teams, Team des Aubry, Team Cherry, and Team O'Hara. Des Aubry, the one I was in, the team consisted of 1 tank company, B company, 1 infantry company, or I think it was maybe a section of infantry company, and maybe a platoon of engineers and a couple of medics. We went north from Bastogne, we went 5 miles north into Noville. Cherry went east to Longville, and Warden went southeast to Warden. And this formed some sort of a half-assed perimeter around Bastogne, and because we didn't know what we were going to run into. See, they wanted to get an idea of what was happening. We were sent up as feelers, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, when Eisenhower told Bradley to tell Georgie Boy, to Patton, to send 1 armored division of his armored division up from the south, where we were, and 1 armored division from the north, the 7th Armored Division came from the north. We get sent up from the south, and George put up a squawk. He said, "I'm ready to attack Metz." He says to Bradley, "Tell Georgie Boy I'm running the war, not him." And of course Patton sent us up. And at that point we were actually detached from the 3rd Army. So I personally ended up in Noville. And the first night, we got there about midnight, and around 2 o'clock in the morning, the thing came over our radio. Don't forget, I had the 2 receivers and a transmitter. I get the thing, enemy armor coming down the road. So I found out later, I didn't know at the time, they opened fire on the Germans opened fire on them, and both of them pulled back. The Germans, according to the reports I read after, thought that they ran into a much bigger outfit than they had. And the Americans, of course, after the firefight, they pulled back into Bastogne, into Noville.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of the 2 days of hell. That was the night of the 18th, the morning of the 19th. Now on the 19th, all night long, you know how the rains were? Picture, instead of hail, shells. They shelled and shelled. There was almost no let up. We didn't even have to worry about posting guards that night because there was no need of it. Everyone was wide awake. So finally, a lot of that action is put in this book here. Finally, what happened, the Germans, they were determined to come into Noville. This was the 2nd Panzer Division of the German Army. Because now, you got to keep in mind, Hitler had this all set up on a time schedule.
Yeah.
Time was of the essence because he didn't have the gasoline nor the equipment to carry through. His idea was, see, Hitler knew the war was over. He was done. This was his last gamble. He wanted to split the British and the American characters apart, Montgomery and the rest of them, and sue for peace so that England would join him and fight the Russians.
He focused on
That was the overall thing that he knew he was doomed. But after the July 20th attempt in his life, he recognized that this is what he had to do to save his soul, if you will, pun intended.
Yeah.
Well, what happened when we got up to Noville and this all took place? Noville was the gateway to Bastogne from the north. So they wanted Noville bad. So this is why they drenched us with artillery. Now, one of our half-trucks got hit that night, and on the radio, don't expect any ammunition or gas tonight. Oh, that wasn't such a good thing. That meant, in other words, evidently we were out here in no man's land by ourselves. Well, we ran across, Ziggy, my driver, and myself, we got out, we ran across to the burning half-track, something, again, you'd never do normally. The thing every so often would flare up when it hit some ammunition. We grabbed the 50 caliber off the racks on the side and ran back with the 50 to the tank. We got about 4 or 5 boxes before it finally couldn't go back anymore. And in the meantime, the shelling kept going all night. Then the next morning, this would be the morning of the 19th, because these are the shortest days of the year. The morning of the 19th was very important for a lot of reasons. Number one, they had told us no gas or ammunition, and all of a sudden, to our rear, coming up the road from Bastogne, are these guys, and we at first thought they could be Germans, you know, with the baggy pants. Fortunately, I got my training at Fort Benning, and I knew what a paratrooper was. And these were the 101st, the first contingent coming up from Bastogne. And we were ready to turn the gun around, but thankfully we didn't. This was the morning. That same morning, off in the distant horizon on the road to Vaux, V-A-U-X, there were 3 tanks, German tanks, and for whatever the reason, we shot 4 rounds out there, and the first tank stopped. The other 2, unbeknownst to us at the time, assumed, whatever the reason, gave us their whole broadside. I just traversed the gun a little bit and got the next one with 1 shot. 2 more shots, got the 3rd one. I didn't find out until 50 some odd years later, the reason they were turning sideways, they were stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
And so between the combination of the mud and our shots, we stopped all 3 of them. The company commander, who at that time was Captain Schultz in the schoolhouse where, what's his name, got killed, LaPrade, the division, the 101st Regimental Commander got killed in the schoolhouse. And our Desaubrey got hurt, and he was later taken prisoner. tank came down, he wanted to give us a silver star for the excellent shooting. Of course, all we're doing is our job, as far as I'm concerned. Well, he never lived, because when we went back to Bastogne in 1996, I visited his grave. He died the 14th of January, so obviously we never got any silver star. Not that we cared. And anyhow, those 3 tanks we stopped, and then the half-track came down the road trying to get in. We blasted them to bits. And other tanks of B Company, you know, my Baker Company, they did quite a bit of damage according to the thing. A Tiger tank even came into Noville, and as it backed up, they backed over a Jeep, and the guy...
Over a Jeep?
Yeah, and they piled out and ran and left the Tiger there. I didn't see this, I read that in the book later.
Okay.
And Lesniak, one of our tank commanders, was the one there. His tank had the gun jammed, but he fired some shells out of the jammed gun and it worked. But anyhow, so that was the 19th. And the shooting went on all day long. It was miserable, to say the least. It was just unnerving all day and all night. The next morning I was on guard in the turret, and all of a sudden I hear German language coming over our radio. Little did I know, this must have been tanks from the 9th Armor they had captured were using against us, because they would be on a different channel. Then the next thing you know, there was a dead trooper lying in front of the tank. He must have been killed during the night. And then, all of a sudden, the firing started, and the German infantry started to come up the rise in front of our tank. The nearest ones were maybe 50, 75 yards. It was foggy. They were coming up under the fog. And we started firing our 50 caliber. Hildor, the gunner at the time, was firing the 50, and he said, I'm going to get some more ammunition. He went down to get ammunition. The barrel started firing single shot. I took the old barrel off, screws off from the front, the 50. Had the new barrel in my hand, ready to stick it in, and bang, my arm is hanging, and the blood is pouring off it. And I'm turning my shoulder, nothing's happening down here. And then Hilda come up out of the tank, and his head went like this, and stuff came out of his helmet. I found out later he lost an ear. And so I yelled down at Skrobicki, our driver, I said, Ziggy, you better stay in the tank, you better in it and out it, and tell the assistant, he was a new guy, the assistant driver. And with that, I went to the front of the tank to lay down to get to the aid station, which is a church I found out about 50 yards up the street in the middle of Noville. The fog lifted, and about 100 yards, 150 yards in front of it is a German tank. I don't know whether that's the one that hit us or not, or whether it was artillery. All I know is I jumped off the tank, took my grease gun because I didn't want to get captured. I figured I'd take one with me if I get, and I landed on my ass, and as I did, boom, I got lifted in the air, blew my shoe off. I have no feel in the bottom of that foot. Took part of my finger, and I still got 10 or 12 pieces in my scalp all these years. I don't know where that must have gone through my helmet.
Was it a tank shot landed near you? Or
I don't know what it was.
Okay.
You never know. So in the meantime, a paratrooper came up, and I put my good arm around him. He wasn't a medic. And I limped in my good leg, and he grabbed the other guy under the armpits, and he dragged him. And we went down about 20 yards to this farmhouse where they had the place for the cows, you know. And went in there, and just then a couple of shells came through the cement, and he said, you want to try to make it the aid station? I said, don't you getting killed by cement. So we limped up to the aid station, which was in the church in Noville. The captain there cut my clothes off, gave me 2 shots of cognac, a couple of pints of blood, tells all the walking wounded to get downstairs, this place will have to come in any minute, and it's going to send me back to Bastogne on the hood of a Jeep. Guy comes in, the Jeep just got hit, that's on fire. This was my lucky day. So they ended up putting me in a half-track with 3 guys. I had no pain because the nerves were shot. And the only reason I didn't die from loss of blood, according to my doctor, it didn't hit an artery evidently. If that hit an artery, I'd have been gone with the way the blood was pouring. Well, anyhow, on the way back to Bastogne, these 2 guys are from the rear, of course. And the medic, the half-track was not a medic half-track. So there's 3 guys all knocked out and me, 4 of us in the back. We're down the road about a mile. He jammed on the brakes, piled out, the 2 of them. I don't want to repeat what I said, but you can imagine.
Yeah.
I said, keep this effing thing going. It's only a burp gun that won't hit. Down the road we go, they pull the same thing again. A burp gun goes off, and they stop. As if that would help stopping it. So finally I ended up in Bastogne in the hospital. Now this was of course the 20th. And they gave me 2 more pints of blood, but where they couldn't find a vein, they gave me in the neck here. They didn't even move my head. And then I was put in a train back to Paris, had an operation in Paris, crossed the channel to England, and I was in England New Year's Day. And by the way, the 66th Infantry Division got torpedoed in the channel. I found that out much later. They lost I don't know how many men. And then I spent 3 months in England, and finally I started walking when I got back to the States, and that's where I met my wife, who's sitting here with me. And we ended up with 7 children and a pretty good damn life, all things considered, because I'm still here at 88. And she still looks good at 85. That's it.
All right. So those are the questions I wanted to ask. Going back to the beginning, I missed a few things.
The what?
Well, going back to the beginning and where you were doing basic training. When you were drafted, how'd your parents react?
They didn't like it at all.
Oh, of course.
Of course not.
Can you elaborate on that at all?
Well, I'll tell you, being Armenian, you heard of the Armenian genocide?
Yes.
Need I say more?
No.
They're not concerned with acts of aggression. And of course, what better act of aggression than Hitler and Mussolini and so forth?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
I should elaborate. They only had one son. I lost a brother when he was 2 years old to whooping cough, so here's their one son, you know.
Well, this is this question. Did you hate the Germans?
No, not to. Matter of fact, I didn't get a chance to put on the tape. During that encounter where we, the little Joe and my bedroll got blasted out, we captured a bunch of prisoners. And one of them was coming. Now, I was born and raised a Roman Catholic. And one of the prisoners came out, and he was trembling, and he had rosary beads. And the thought went through my head, here's a guy I don't even know. Of course, he was afraid we were going to shoot him.
Yeah.
Here's a guy I don't even know, and he's the same religion as I am. What the hell am I doing here? What's he doing here?
Yeah.
That thought raced through my mind. And I have to be honest with you, over the years, between that and a few other things, I have turned from Catholicism to agnostic to being an atheist. And that's where I remain. Because as far as I'm concerned, a lot of people, they say there are no atheists in a foxhole. I'll question that, because some of the articles I've read by guys who've been through a hell of a lot, they are firm atheists, because you see, I could be next to you. There was one episode over there that I heard about, I didn't see it. The guy's tank commander's sitting on the top of the turret.
Okay.
He's exposed from here out. The gunner's seat is right there inside the tank. If you dropped a plumb line from the commander's thing down, you would miss the gunner's seat. That's how it's purposely put in there to be close to the gun. A piece of shell came down, knocked the helmet off the tank commander, didn't scratch him, went down through the back of the seat and killed the gunner. Now, if you could tell me that if you tried and you had a helicopter, I don't think you could do that. But you see, things like this are fake. The guy that challenged me thought I was a German, the guy that walked back with me. Oh, that same day when I went through, I got shot at by a sniper too. And 2 of our infantrymen took him out. And you know, getting shot at by a sniper, you know, you duck, but it's already too late. And it's one of those deals when you have a close call with your car, you start shuddering 5 minutes down the line. At the moment, same thing.
Yeah.
When you see all these happening, it's got to be fate, that's all.
Yeah.
There's no guiding light from above. Although I have to say, when I get hit, I vowed that if I got out of here alive, which I didn't think I would, I'd never do anything wrong again.
I think everyone did
I
that.
forgot about that.
I have to say, whether he says he's atheist or what, he is one of the most Christian acting men you'll ever meet.
How did you feel about your officers in general?
Officers in general?
Yeah, not just, you know, at high level, but everyone below that you're in
Well, let's
contact
put
with?
it this way. The officers we had were very good, with one exception. We had a guy named Sullivan. He had been in the Pacific for 3 years, non-combat. He applied for OCS, and that way he got back in the States. He came back with us. And down in Alsace-Lorraine, we were in a static position for about a week. The Germans were about maybe a half a mile away in the woods, and if there was a lot of counter battery going over our head. Of course, we were eating K ration, C ration, throwing everything in the mud. There was a big tank trap in front of us, zigzag, dug deep. And in the strategic withdrawal, I'll say, the colonel's Jeep was left out there. So he came out of nowhere. He was our maintenance officer. He came out of nowhere and said, "What's all this? We got to police all this up. It's up front." And he said, and we're going out to pull the colonel's Jeep back. That meant that we had to take our